Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere cold. Like ridiculously cold. The kind of cold where your breath freezes mid-sentence, your eyelashes stick together, and your fingers forget they were ever warm. You stand beneath a snow-choked sky, the wind carving invisible lines across your cheeks, and the horizon completely whitewashed. You're not climbing Everest or camping in Siberia. No, tonight you serve a man who believes snowflakes are sacred. Not just beautiful, not just fleeting, holy, and he's decided to collect them, individually, in clay jars, for reasons no one entirely understands. You probably won't survive this job, not because it's dangerous, though okay, hypothermia isn't not on the table, but because the task is so bizarre, so delicate, and so unbelievably obsessive that it might actually freeze your brain in slow motion. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I'm always curious who else is out there, tucked in under blankets, listening to stories in the dark. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The wind slaps you awake on the upper terrace of the palace. Your boots are barely gripping the slick tiles, and your breath comes in short, sharp clouds. Behind you, a stone hallway glows with torchlight, but out here, it's just you, the storm, and a figure cloaked in navy and fur. He doesn't turn when you arrive. He simply lifts a finger and points toward the sky. You see that, he says. They're falling perfectly tonight. You squint upward. Snowflakes tumble from the clouds. No two alike, that old saying echoing in your head. But he isn't smiling. His voice is flat, like this is deadly serious. I want one in every jar. Only one. Unbroken, unmelted, unrepeated. You swallow. There are thousands of jars, you say, though it comes out more like a wheeze. Yes, the Emperor says, and there will be more. And that's it. That's your new job. As he disappears down the hallway, you're left wondering what kind of man demands the impossible, then leaves you standing in the blizzard with no instructions. Except there were rumors that the Emperor, third of his line and allegedly born during a freak spring snowfall, had an obsession with the cold. His nursery was chilled with blocks of imported glacier ice. His tutors taught him snowflake symmetry before mathematics. And now, in his adulthood, he's become, well, this. Historians still argue whether this fixation was madness or metaphor. Some say it was grief. His mother died in childbirth under a rare white sky. Others say it was prophecy, a belief that snowflakes carry messages from the heavens, but only if preserved exactly as they fall. Either way, you've got a problem, a logistical one, because when you're tasked with placing a snowflake into a clay jar without melting, cracking, or duplicating it, you realize just how dumbly fragile frozen water really is. You try holding your palm out. The flake dissolves before it touches you. You grab a jar, handmade, light brown, stamped with the imperial seal, and try catching one midair. It lands, quivers, and poof. Gone. Behind you, a servant appears with a box of tongs. Bronze ones. Very fancy. Totally useless. Maybe try silk, the servant suggests helpfully, before vanishing like a bad idea. You head down into the storeroom. It's half underground, torch-lit, and lined floor to ceiling with shelves, each holding identical jars. Thousands. Some still warm from the kiln. Others wrapped in ice dam cloth. A few are already labeled in spidery script. Feather type, courtyard drift, hour passed on. You rub your hands together and realize that snowflakes don't fall on a schedule. They don't arrive neatly categorized. They appear when they want, shaped by wind, temperature, even smog from the chimney vents. There's a whole science behind it. Snow crystal morphology. You vaguely remember hearing that at the academy. Six-sided dendrites, columns, plates, needles. It all depends on the air pressure and temperature as the crystal forms. The tiniest shift, and boom, new design. You grab a jar and set it on a velvet-covered tray. Try again. This time, the flake lands and stays. Perfect. Tiny. Elegant. Then you breathe on it by accident and watch it collapse into a shimmer of nothing. Right? No breathing. You try again. And again. 14 jars later, you have 2 successes, which is when the steward shows up and says the emperor expects the first 100 by sundown. You laugh. He doesn't. Somewhere deep in the palace, a gong sounds. Another flurry begins outside. You hear the rattling shutters, the hiss of snow against glassless windows. Time to try again. Your fingers are numb. Your shoulders ache. You start speaking to the jars softly. Please just hold on, like they're wild animals or infants. And weirdly, it helps. The next batch goes smoother. You begin to understand wind patterns. Which flakes fall slowest? Which ones survive the catch? You experiment with jar temperature. Cool them slightly before catching, but not so cold they shatter. You even try using chilled silk screens stretched over the jar's mouth. And one time, just once, you catch a hexagonal stunner with needle-like arms and it stays. You seal the jar and write your first label. Type 5, Spindle Raid, Pre-Dawn Silence. Later that night, while soaking your hands in lukewarm rose water, you hear it again. The Emperor's voice echoing through the hall. I want one from every sky. You don't even know what that means yet, but soon you will. The next morning, frost creaks across the corridor stones like tiny bones settling. You shuffle through the hush, following a dim trail of oil lamps that twitch whenever the draft grows playful. Their copper dishes cast amber petals along the walls, and each time one flutters you pretend it's applause, because frankly you deserve a standing ovation just for keeping your fingertips attached overnight. The storeroom door yawns open with that damp what Sayu now recognize as palace shorthand for good luck, sucker. Inside, the Emperor stands amid a forest of shelves so high they vanish in a gloom, every plank sagging beneath rows of squat, wide-mouthed clay jars. The scene looks like a potter's idea of infinity. Somewhere a droplet plinks, melt water sliding off a beam, then silence settles again, muffled and cottony. He doesn't greet you. Instead, he lifts one jar, rotates it under the lantern, and you spot a faint spiral etched around its belly, a stylized snow whirl. Potter's finished another 3,000 during the night, he says, as though discussing fresh loaves of bread. We'll need at least 10 times that by solstice. You do the math in your head, instantly regretting ever learning numbers. That's a lot of solstice cheer. You reply, voice cracking like thin ice. Joke number 1 successfully launched. The Emperor completely ignores it. His gloved thumb traces the rim. Each vessel will cradle a single flake. Each flake must retain its unique lattice. No chips, no twins, no melting. Understand. You nod, which is apparently the universal sign for absolutely not, but please continue threatening my sanity. He sets the jar back and walks away, cloak whispering against the cold-packed earth floor, leaving you amid your new ceramic kingdom. Lamps sputter behind him. Their flames stretch, then choke, then brighten again. A flickering Morse code that seems to spell, run. You stay anyway, because that's what doomed protagonists do. Taking a steadying breath, you inspect the nearest shelf. Every jar is handmade, sun-fired rather than kiln-fired to keep the clay porous. A palace scholar once insisted porous walls breathe, with the snowflake reducing stress fractures. Historians still argue whether porous clay actually prolongs ice integrity or whether the scholar simply owns stock in local mud pits. Either way, the jars feel cool to the touch, faintly gritty, and each lid bears a pressed wax seal of the imperial snow emblem, 6 points radiating from a tiny crown shape. Mainstream historical fact time. Clay storage vessels have kept humanity's favorite substances safe for at least 11,000 years. Grain in Mesopotamia, olive oil in Greece. Even the Dead Sea Scrolls rested in ceramic wombs before scholars pried them open. You run a finger around one lid and imagine some future historian lovingly cataloging Snowflake, jar number 5872, and praising its elegant utilitarianism. More likely they'll glaze over after the first 1,000. Same as you. You lean in, catching the faintest scent of wet earth and charcoal. Somewhere overhead, the brick flue burps out a puff of smoke. The potter's kills never sleep, and neither, apparently, will you. A stray thought surfaces. How many cups of tea can the human body handle before it turns entirely into caffeine? Probably fewer than you'll be forced to ingest. Your reverie breaks when a steward wheels in a low trolley piled with folded linens. Transport cloths, he announces, pre-chilled on the palace ramparts. Handle with reverence and, preferably, gloves thicker than those sad socks you call mittens. His grin is lopsided, daring you to laugh. You counter with joke number 2. Gloves thicker than palace entry? Impossible. He snorts, deposits the load, and disappears before you can recruit him into a complimentary mental breakdown. You start staging a system. Shelf by shelf, you clear small holding zones. Linen-lined trays to ferry empties to the courtyard. A cluster of brazier-cooled tongs for flake capture, and a cramped labeling station where you sharpen horsetail brushes and thin ink with distilled snowmelt. Because using ordinary water, you're told, would be spiritually inconsistent. Quirky tidbit. In Renaissance alchemy texts, snow water was prized as a key ingredient in concoctions promising eternal youth, right up there with ground pearls and optimistic budgeting. By midday, you've organized 300 jars for the first sortie. You gingerly lift the lid. The interior is shadowy, smelling faintly of nothing, which feels appropriate. Then you spot a hairline crack at the base, just big enough to compromise everything. You mark the lid with a chalk X and set the jar aside for recycling. Quality control, you remind yourself, is the only shield between your neck and a frosty chopping block. Another gong echoes, lunch. You ignore it. Food will only fog your breath and threaten the flakes. So instead you sip tepid barley tea, reviewing the emperor's earlier words. Each flake must retain its lattice. You picture those branching dendrites, each needle-thin filament like icy coral. 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Amateur hour. The palace stores frozen bricks from glaciers north of the capital, maintaining inner chambers at a knuckle-numbing 25. Also, a snowflake can feel comfortable. Historians still argue whether the emperor's engineers copied Persian yakshals, those ancient adobe ice houses, or stumbled on a similar physics by sheer obsessive accident. Your thoughts drift to the concept of rarity. One snowflake, one jar, repeat forever. Statistically, the odds of identical flakes are astronomically low, yet here you are being paid, questionably, to make sure lightning never strikes the same lattice twice. It's the bureaucratic version of Sisyphus, only your boulder evaporates if you blink. Joke number 3 lands when you jot in your notebook. If anyone asks what I do for a living, I'll say, I'm in quality assurance for frozen fractals. You chuckle alone. The clay jars remain indifferent. Afternoon brings a surprise inspection. The emperor's chief record keeper, a rail-thin woman draped in account ledgers like scarves, glides through the aisles. She taps her quill on jar rims, verifying inventory against a tablet lined with minuscule abacus beads. Flake supply, projected versus actual, she murmurs. Ahead on jars, behind on actual snow. Recommend increased precipitation by next Tuesday. You gape. You can schedule weather? We schedule everything, she replies without looking up. Look lively. We have a symposium tonight on encouraging cloud formation through gong resonance. A mainstream fact sneaks in. Ancient Chinese meteorologists really did employ bronze chimes and smoke signals to study storms, noting how sound dampened in moisture-laden air. Whether banging gongs creates snow is another matter entirely. Yet stranger empire project have succeeded. Salt smelting, anyone. She signs off your shelf cluster with an impressively florid flourish, then pauses. We realize the task is daunting, but the emperor believes that when the collection is complete, the empire itself will be perfectly reflected, unique, delicate, yet preserved forever. For a moment, you almost feel his vision, an endless winter museum, each fragile shard of sky archived, labeled safe from time. Then your back twinges, and the moment skitters away like a flake on hot stone. Evening drapes violet light through high slits in the wall. A fresh wind sings beneath the door. You button your coat to your chin, slide a linen over one arm like a waiter, and begin loading trays. Each jar gets a gentle shush, a promise you'll find it the perfect match. You picture yourself as Cupid, But instead of arrows, you lob microcrystals, falling in love for half a heartbeat before sealing the lid. The corridor outside yawns long, torches fluttering, servants hustling like beetles in ankle-deep drifts. Somewhere someone's attempting to tune a gong to snow-summoning C-sharp. It sounds like a whale coughing into a trash can. You smile despite yourself and step into the swirling dark, ready to harvest tonight's crop of miracles. Snow doesn't ask your permission. It doesn't warn you when it's coming or bother explaining why it lands softer on one roof than another. It simply arrives, an uninvited guest, draping silence across the world like a sleepy quilt. And tonight, the silence feels ancient. You stand beside a group of monks at the base of the sacred plateau, boots buried to your ankles in powder that falls so slowly it looks suspended in thought. The air tastes like frozen chalk. The monks say this is the path to dream snow, a type of flake that hasn't been recorded in 3 generations. Legend says it only falls once every few decades, during a lunar alignment, when the moon hangs over the peak like a silver coin balanced on its edge. They hand you a thick robe, heavier than your old tax debt, and nod solemnly. One raises a lantern. No talking past the shrine, he warns. The wind listens. You raise an eyebrow. Joke number 1 is practically gift-wrapped here, but decide not to test the wind's hearing. Your ears are already tingling, and the last thing you want is to make an enemy of a mountain breeze that might also be a minor deity. The climb begins in darkness. The monks' lanterns sway in slow rhythm, casting warped halos across the snow. Your breath fogs before you, making ghosts of every exhale. The trail is narrow, flanked by frostbitten pines and the occasional shrine carved directly into the rock face. Tiny arched doorways surrounded by icicle clusters that look suspiciously like frozen mustaches. Somewhere above, thunder mumbles. You glance up and glimpse the curve of the moon through patchy clouds. The monks pause, murmuring short phrases. You catch only 2 words, alignment and soon. You trudge upward, slipping once on a patch of glassy ice, cleverly disguised as a safe step. The monk behind you catches your arm, then releases it without a word. You try a quiet, thanks, but receive no response. Right? No talking. The wind is still judging. You pass a cluster of wooden prayer wheels. They spin slowly in the breeze, ticking like patient clocks. One of the monks runs a hand across them as he passes, as though tuning the mountain's pulse. It's then you realize these people aren't just snow chasers. They're collectors, too. Archivists of flakes, so rare they exist only in ceremony and whispered memory. Mainstream historical moment. In parts of the Tibetan Plateau and Central Asia, snow has long held ritual significance, used in blessings, omens, and even ancestral rites. Some texts mention sky writings, flakes believed to hold messages from the gods, readable only under moonlight with a mirror-polished obsidian disc. You don't have obsidian. You have fingers that don't bend anymore and a clay jar strapped carefully to your chest like a newborn. Near the summit, the trail narrows to a precarious ledge. Below you, fog coils around the cliffs like it's trying to climb too. The snow deepens, then softens. Suddenly, everything is quiet. Not just regular quiet, cosmic quiet. Your breath stops, not from fear, but because the air itself seems to press pause on existence. You step into a plateau clearing, ringed by leaning stones carved with ice-pick runes. The monks form a circle and kneel, lanterns doused in unison. Only the moon lights the scene now, casting silver light sharp enough to slice. Then it starts. The snow falls differently here. Not faster, not heavier, just stranger. Each flake descends in slow, lazy spirals, their shapes unusually precise even without a lens. You catch one on the back of your glove and freeze. Literally, but also figuratively, because this flake is huge, nearly the width of your thumbnail, and shaped like a 6-pointed labyrinth. No melting, no vanishing, just sitting there as if posing. You quickly uncap the jar, using silk tweezers borrowed from the court alchemist. The flake slides into the opening with barely a nudge. You hold your breath. It stays intact. You seal the lid. Exhale. That's one. One dream snow. And then the monks start chanting. Low, rhythmic syllables that seem to rise with the falling flakes. One monk begins painting a symbol in the snow with a warm metal stylus. The flake melts beneath it, but the trace left behind glows faintly blue. You blink, unsure if it's the moonlight or something more metaphysical. Quirky tidbit. In ancient Taoist texts, certain mountain snows were believed to store cosmic memory. Ice formed not from water vapor, but from heaven's breath. Collecting it wasn't science, it was scripture. You're handed another jar, then another. The snow doesn't stop. Flake after flake lands delicately on prepared silk pads. No two alike. Some are spiked, some lacy. One has a bizarre Mobius-like twist that makes your head hurt. And you keep catching them. Somewhere in the middle of it all, you lose track of time. Whether the moon has moved or the mountain has turned, you can't say. But when you finally step back, 7 jars hang from your belt, 7 more in your pack. Each sealed, labeled with trembling script. Dreamfall, high peak, second hour of hush. As you begin the descent, the monks say nothing. No congratulations. No farewells. Just a subtle nod, and the parting gift of a warm rice bun wrapped in banana leaf. You bite into it halfway down the trail, and honestly, it's the closest thing to spiritual enlightenment you've experienced all day. Your return to the palace is slow. By the time you reach the outer gate, dawn is pressing pale blue into the sky. The guards open the doors without a word. They know where you've been. The snow on your boots marks you as someone who has glimpsed the other flakes. In the storeroom, you set the jars gently on a raised platform. Each is already misting faintly at the edges, not melting, just breathing. One steward asks if the dream ones glow. You smirk, only when the mountain feels like bragging. Historians still argue whether dream snow was meteorological, mystical, or a byproduct of altitude hallucination. Some claim monks added powdered quartz to the wind to make flakes glitter. Others suggest rare magnetic fields on the plateau disrupt water crystallization. No one knows for sure, but tonight you felt it. You collapse onto a straw mat beside the wall and stare up at the flickering lamp. 17 jars complete. Only several thousand more to go. The next evening, your hands still tingling from the plateau chill, you find yourself seated cross-legged in the court alchemist's laboratory, a room that smells strongly of beeswax, cinnamon bark, and the metallic tang of old ambition. It's warm here, almost too warm, and the abrupt shift from frostbitten mountain air to steaming glass tubes makes your head feel like someone replaced your brain with a hot dumpling. The alchemist is already busy. She's draped in layers of velvet and gauze, her long sleeves perpetually dragging through powdered sulfur, and she's muttering something about evaporation curves and the arrogance of sunlight. On the long stone table in front of her, a snowflake melts on black silk, its collapse watched through what she proudly calls her glassless microscope. Which, let's pause there, because yes, this thing is real. It's not actually glassless, but it's a system of overlapping obsidian lenses, polished to absurd smoothness and mounted on a contraption of brass dials, mirrors, and sacred geometry stencils. The image it gives is inverted, high contrast, and according to the alchemist, closer to how the snowflake sees itself. You suppress joke number 1, something about narcissistic crystals, and lean in. Projected onto a curved bronze disc is the flake in question. It's halfway melted, but you can still make out the shape. Needle-thin spikes curling like fern leaves. She taps the disc with a stylus. This is what the emperor wants preserved. The symmetry, the defiance of entropy, the silent math of snow. She gestures to a scroll unrolled beside her. It's full of diagrams, snowflake schematics, waveforms, something suspiciously resembling a dance routine. Each flake records a pressure event in the upper atmosphere, she says, eyes glittering. A 6-armed diary from the clouds. You think you're just preserving crystals, but really, you're preserving history. Mainstream historical fact here. In the 17th century, Johannes Kepler, the same guy who gave us planetary motion, wrote an essay called On the Six-Cornered Snowflake, trying to understand why snow always forms with 6 sides. He never fully solved it, but the obsession with symmetry? very much alive and thriving in this overly dramatic lab. You ask the alchemist how she examines snowflakes without melting them. She raises an eyebrow, then gestures toward a box full of what looks like shiny wafers. Charcoal silk composite, blessed by temple bells. Don't smirk. It's temperature stabilized to within 1/10 of a degree. You weren't smirking. Not exactly. She opens a small chest and pulls out a flake you swear is still whole. It's resting like a jewel on a tiny silk square framed by gold wire. This one fell during a solar eclipse, she murmurs. The Emperor claims it hums when held against the chest. You offer your hand. She offers her look. Not for amateurs, she says. Fair enough. She walks you through how she classifies each flake by primary structure, plate, dendrite, column, branching behavior, interstitial fuzz, and any mystic resonance anomalies, which according to her are rare but definitely measurable with the right incense burning nearby. Quirky tidbit. Some fringe naturalists during the Qing dynasty believed snowflakes could speak to bamboo, causing certain stalks to grow spiraled instead of straight if planted during snowfall. You ask if the Emperor believes in that sort of thing. She laughs. Belief has nothing to do with it. He wants all the flakes, all the stories they whisper. You get the feeling she's only half kidding. She hands you a tiny brush made from phoenix feather, probably just fancy chicken, and gestures toward a tray of freshly caught flakes suspended in cold gel. Try preserving one, she says. Then sketch it. You lean in. The flake you choose is unusually spiny, like a snowfish's skeleton. You slide it gently onto the silk with the feather brush, watching your breath the entire time. It stays intact. You feel weirdly proud. She nods at your sketch. Not terrible, but you forgot the subnodes on the tertiary arms. Typical beginner's oversight. Still, I've seen worse. You're about to argue when a bell chimes 3 times from outside, a signal you've come to dread. Another delivery from the mountaintop. More jars, more flakes, more impossible expectations. But before you go, the alchemist leans in, lowers her voice. They say the Emperor's mother was born during a snowfall, so rare it left black flakes. Charcoal snow. Never verified, of course. But if you ever see one, don't jar it. Just bring it to me. Historians still argue whether the so-called black snow was volcanic ash mistaken for precipitation or an omen recorded by court dream interpreters. Either way, you nod solemnly, pretending like you wouldn't absolutely keep that flake for yourself and retire to some tropical island where it never snows again. You exit the lab carrying a new set of supplies, gel trays, etched styluses, and a copper amulet to calm your temperature aura. You're not sure that last part's even legal. Outside, the palace courtyard is bathed in early twilight. Snow's just beginning again. Light flurries, soft as whispers. You walk slowly, catching one on your sleeve just to see it up close. 6 arms again. Always 6, unless it's broken or special. You pause, hold out a jar, watch a flake drift inside, wobbling like it's dizzy. Then, as the seal closes, you think, somewhere in this endless, frozen scavenger hunt, there's a flake waiting with your name on it. Not metaphorically, literally. The pattern of its arms, the angles of its spikes. Somewhere in the math of falling ice is a story that belongs only to you. You just have to find it. You ride into the desert under a sky so empty, it feels like the earth has forgotten how to look up. Heat still radiates from the sand, even after nightfall, though the wind bites cold around your ankles. The camels grunt disapproval with every shifting dune. You're part of a small caravan, just 3 animals, 2 guides, and you, the only person here who packed clay jars instead of water. The Emperor's orders had been clear, in the vague way only tyrants can manage. A snowflake from the southern desert, where it falls once in a generation. Capture it, label it, return. You wanted to ask how he knew it would snow this year, this week, tonight, but no one questions the man who owns 6,000 ice-filled shelves. Your guides say little, but gesture often, to stars, to rock formations, to old wind-sculpted shrines buried in sand. One offers you a pouch of dried melon. You take it. Your stomach thanks you like it's just been released from prison. Mainstream historical note. Snow in deserts isn't just poetic, it's real, if rare. Even the Sahara has recorded snowfall, most recently near Ein Sefra. Cold air sweeping down from the mountains, sudden drops in temperature, and voila, snow on sand, a contradiction scribbled by weather's drunkest in turn. And tonight, supposedly, it's happening again. By midnight, you reach a basin ringed with ancient stones, wind-carved spires that once served as waypoints for spice caravans. The guides start unpacking blankets and a small brazier. One of them sets a copper bowl on the sand and pours in water. Then he begins to hum, low, rhythmic, hypnotic. You sit cross-legged, staring at the sky. Stars blaze harder here, uncaring. The cold tightens, and for a brief moment you doubt everything. This desert, this order, this life where capturing snowflakes earns imperial favor instead of padded walls. But then it happens. A single white fleck floats down, tiny and slow. It vanishes before it lands, but another follows. Then another. You scramble for your jars. The flakes don't fall like mountain snow. These are denser, almost translucent, shaped more like discs than dendrites. You catch one on a chilled silk square. It stays. You lean close, and to your absolute horror, it has 8 points. 8. You seal the jar with trembling fingers. Quirky tidbit. In certain Bedouin folk tales, snowflakes with more than 6 arms are considered jinn prints, spells caught mid-air, physical proof of mischief in the wind. You're not saying this is one of those, but your camel has started walking backwards. You try another jar. More flakes come, each different. One resembles a bird in flight. One looks like a tiny wagon wheel. One appears broken, but no, it's just asymmetrical. Desert logic, one of the guides mutters. Even the snow here doesn't like being told what to be. You end up with 5 sealed jars by dawn. 5 impossible flakes, none of which obey the Emperor's neat, 6-pointed mandate. You wonder, should you tell him? Will he see the asymmetry as failure? Or as proof that nature still knows how to surprise a man who thinks he can own it? The guides brew tea with dried mint and something suspiciously bitter. You drink it anyway. When they begin packing up, one of them hands you a small bundle wrapped in blue cloth. Inside is a tiny shard of quartz, frosted white, but warm to the touch. It helps you remember what you saw, he says. Snow doesn't like being believed in. You nod, unsure if that's a blessing or a diagnosis. On the journey back, the wind shifts constantly. Your face stings. The camels complain. You dream once, just once, of a giant flake made entirely of mirrors, hovering over the palace and reflecting not light, but memory. You wake up with your forehead against the jar pack, heart racing. When the palace gates come into view, the morning is already brushing color across the walls. You're escorted directly to the Emperor's viewing chamber. He's seated cross-legged, surrounded by scrolls, and dipping a brush into snow-melt ink. Drawing. Snowflakes, of course. You kneel. Offer the jars. He studies the first. Tilts it. Frowns. 8 points, he murmurs. You say nothing. Just wait. He opens the second. This one twisted. He lifts the third into the light. For a moment, his lips twitch, almost a smile. Then, softly, so even deserts remember winter. Historians still argue whether the emperor ever left the palace during his reign. Some say he feared travel would expose him to heat, or even to a different kind of sky. Others suggest he once rode north and returned so changed he no longer believed in seasons. He doesn't reject your jars. Instead, he places them on a special side shelf, near a brazier, oddly. Maybe he's not trying to preserve them at all. Maybe he's testing them. Or you're dismissed with a single nod. Back in the storeroom, you log the flakes. Desert Fall, anomaly type 8 point. Subentry, memory quartz, gifted post-collection. You wonder if anyone will believe that part, or if they'll think you miscounted. One steward peers over your shoulder and asks, snow in the desert. What's next? Rain in the archives. You grin. Joke number 1 for today lands on time. Only if the jars start crying. That night, your dreams are scattered. One moment you're catching snow on a camel's back. The next you're floating in a room of inverted flakes, all falling upward. You wake up halfway, convinced your brain has restructured itself into a fractal. You check your inventory. 74 jars, all unique. And now, Some of them don't even play by the rules. You're woken before sunrise by the rustle of parchment and the soft clink of glass. The royal archivist is in your quarters again, which would be fine if your quarters weren't also the supply room, and if the archivist weren't so enthusiastic about lighting candles directly under shelves of dried vellum. "I need the meltwater from jar 39 beta," she says, holding a teacup-sized dish like a priest preparing a ritual. There's a theory about its evaporation path and a correlation with lunar phases. Maybe musical notes. You blink. It's melted, only partially. That's why it's important. You drag yourself out of bed and fish through the back shelf. Jar 39 beta had contained a hook-branched, pre-dawn flake, inner courtyard, light wind. You remember catching it, delicate, like the skeletal wing of a frost dragonfly. You unseal the wax lid and confirm. The flake is gone, but what's left is a single bead of meltwater. Crystal clear, a shimmering teardrop of the past. The archivist beams. Now we archive it. You follow her down, twisting corridors into the inner library, which is nothing like the rest of the palace. This room breathes cold, its walls layered with slates of frozen ink and rolled scrolls pressed flat between panes of horn. At its heart stands the ice library, not a metaphor. It's literally made of ice. Stacks of transparent bricks form shelves upon which glass and clay bottles shimmer, each holding meltwater from long-dissolved flakes. She opens a narrow drawer and adds your contribution. 39 beta, now cataloged under Second Wind Series, Volume 4. You stare at the shelf. Hundreds of jars. Thousands even. Each one once held a flake. Each flake once floated free, utterly unique. And now just liquid. Sleeping. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient cultures often viewed snowmelt as sacred. In the Himalayas, glacial water is still considered holy, believed to carry messages from the gods. Some cultures even kept meltwater in amulets, worn during difficult journeys or illness. The archivist shows you a scroll. It's a snowflake sketch meticulously rendered, labeled in at least 4 different systems: structural, poetic, musical, and emotive inference. One is described as startled joy on a quiet morning. You raise an eyebrow. She shrugs. Art helps. Some flakes don't make sense until you feel them. You ask whether preserving meltwater makes any difference. After all, the flake's gone. She looks at you for a long time, then points at the scroll. The shape vanishes. The memory doesn't. Snow carries more than temperature. It carries mood. You suddenly understand why she's always scribbling notes in the margins of everything. Why the Emperor might be obsessed with collecting things even after they disappear. Maybe he's not trying to own the snow. Maybe he's trying to remember it perfectly, forever. She hands you a small vial. Inside, a few clear drops labeled unknown flake. Classification lost. Only emotion, nostalgia. You pocket it without asking. Quirky tidbit. In one obscure manuscript buried in the southern vault, the Emperor once wrote that if every snowflake were remembered, every one throughout history, the Empire could rebuild itself entirely from memory. People, streets, entire cities etched in frost. Historians still argue whether this was philosophical nonsense or an early blueprint for something more, something like a frozen backup of the world. The archivist leads you to another room, quieter still, where massive jars hold water from multiple flakes, composites, she calls them. One is labeled snow from the day of the coronation. Another reads the flake that refused to melt. You ask about that one. She smiles. It still hasn't. We don't know why. You peek inside. Sure enough, a tiny flake floats like a ghost in suspension, utterly unchanged. Either the alchemist did something brilliant, or physics got bored and walked away. You ask if the Emperor ever visits the archive. Every solstice, she says. He walks the aisles and listens to the jars. Claims he can hear them whisper. You snort. Joke number 1. Hope they're not gossiping about me. She doesn't laugh. Just says they might be. Later, back in your room, you begin labeling the meltwater jars yourself. It's not required, but now you understand. Each flake has a moment, and if you don't trap it in ink, it slips away entirely. Your labels get longer, more specific. You describe light angles, wind moods, background noises. You include emotional notes, unearned optimism, lonely but trying, confused by the moon. You begin to worry you're turning into the archivist. Worse, maybe the emperor. You sleep with a jar beside your bed now, just in case. A storm moves in that night. Not heavy, but oddly musical. The wind whistles down the flues like a reed flute. You swear some of the flakes look familiar, as if the same pattern is returning. But that's impossible, right? Or maybe not. Historians still argue whether snowflake duplication has ever happened. Mathematically, the chances are infinitesimal, but not zero. Some believe the same flake shape could fall again if all conditions were identical. Others believe it's not physics at all, it's memory. Flakes remember how they once were. Or maybe you do. You catch one that looks suspiciously like a flake from your first week. You compare sketches. Could be a cousin, maybe a twin, maybe you're sleep deprived. But still, you jar it. Label it. Add a side note. Possibly return from Dream Archive. Recommend cross-referencing with 11 Theta. By morning, the storm is gone, but the palace feels charged. You pass guards staring into the courtyard like something walked through that wasn't snow. You ask a steward if anything unusual happened overnight. He shrugs. Just the usual. Flakes fell. Some of them sang. You don't even flinch at that anymore. Instead, you head to the archive. You have another flake to whisper into the records. You're in the market square when the tax collector makes his grand announcement. His robes are stiff with frost and ambition, and his voice rings out like a cracked bell. By imperial decree, a levy shall be placed on all captured snowflakes. Each jar transported through public routes must bear an affixed seal of tariff. No seal, no jar. No jar, no empire. The crowd groans. Not audibly, of course. This is the kind of groan that happens deep in your bones, behind your eyes, like a headache preparing for battle. Attacks on snowflakes. Really? Joke number one practically delivers itself. Someone behind you mutters. What's next? Attacks on moonlight. You don't laugh. You're too busy doing mental math. How many sealed jars you've already collected, how many you still have to move, and how many imperial seals you'll now need to affix to the sides of your already delicate clay vessels. The wax alone could bankrupt a mid-sized village. Back in the palace storeroom, the chaos has already started. Jars are stacked 3 high on check-in benches. Clerks scurry around with wax stamps, parchment forms, and official ribbons. One steward, forehead gleaming with stress, waves you over. Did you declare the flakes from the southern desert yet? He asks. You blink. They're in the archival wing. Unsealed. They've been classified. Not tariffed. You point to the jars. They're snowflakes. They're unique. They're not commodities. He sighs. Everything is a commodity now, especially rarity. Mainstream historical note. In ancient empires, taxing the intangible wasn't unheard of. China's Tang dynasty levied fees for shade rights. Yes, literal shadows cast by buildings. And some Mogul rulers charged based on the echo of temple bells. A snowflake tariff? Weird, yes. Unprecedented? Not quite. The next day, smugglers arrive. They don't look like smugglers. One wears an apron and pretends to sell almonds. Another hawks boiled chestnuts with suspiciously insulated barrels. But if you watch closely, and you do because your new hobby is noticing things, you'll see the quick handoff of jars wrapped in salt-damp cloths, passed beneath benches, and loaded into secret carts labeled fish. Very cold, you trail one caravan to the outer village. Inside a tent stitched from discarded silk banners, a woman unseals a jar with practiced care. Inside, a snowflake preserved so perfectly it looks like it might wink at you. 8 arms, symmetrical, hollow centers, what the alchemist would call columnar stars. She sees your stare and shrugs. We don't pay tax on art. Is that what this is now? You ask. She smiles. What else would you call it? The smugglers deal in high-risk flake types. Temperature-sensitive variants that melt too fast to survive inspection. Asymmetricals the emperor still frowns upon. And, most controversially, duplicates. Not actual duplicates, of course, but close enough to invite suspicion. Near twins, they call them. Flakes that resemble classified, ones already entered into the archive. You ask cautiously, isn't duplication impossible? She raises one eyebrow. Or inconvenient? You return to the palace disturbed but not shocked. The Empire wants purity, control, and snowflakes? They defy both. No wonder the black market is thriving. That night, a new posting appears on the inner gates. Severe penalties for flake fraud. All jars must now be presented to the registrar geometries before final archival. The registrar is a humorless man whose monocle appears surgically attached. He inspects your latest submissions with surgical precision, comparing them to his master scroll of flake blueprints. You notice something disturbing. He's begun marking certain types as common form. Discard eligible. Discard. As in, not worth keeping. You interject. They're still unique. He doesn't look up. Not economically unique. Quirky tidbit. In some obscure monetary systems. Looking at you, 13th century Venice. Value was based not on rarity, but on aesthetic. If a coin was too ugly, even if rare, it was less likely to circulate. Now it seems snowflakes are subject to the same fashion trends. You begin hoarding. Not greedily, protectively. You store unremarkable flakes in a secret shelf, behind the spice crates where the cinnamon beetles live. You label them with poetry, not numbers. One simply reads, "She laughed, and it fell." Another, "Last flake before the storm forgot it was coming." You catch yourself humming to them. You're not even surprised anymore. One evening, the emperor calls a court session. Dozens gather. You sneak in at the edge, flake journal hidden beneath your robe. He rises and addresses the room. "The snow has taught us order," he says. "But now it teaches us discretion. Not all flakes shall enter the archive. We must preserve the meaningful, the extraordinary." Historians still argue whether this moment marked the beginning of his descent into perfectionism, or whether it was always there, laced into his DNA like a six-armed echo. After the speech, a steward whispers, "He wants you to cure it now. Not just collect." The weight settles on your shoulders like a fresh snowfall. Later, back in your quarters, you light a lantern and uncap one of the smuggled jars. The flake inside isn't extraordinary. It's chipped, uneven, slightly melted at one corner. You press your forehead to the jar. It's still beautiful, and you keep it. The road to the mountain oracle is barely a road at all. More a suggestion, scrawled in goat trails and prayer flags. You follow it alone, riding a mule with terrible judgment and even worse opinions. It keeps stopping to sniff rocks. You start to wonder if this is all a metaphor. The emperor's latest demand had been, how do you put this gently? Esoteric. Bring me the heaviest snowflake. Not the largest. Not the prettiest. Not the rarest. The heaviest. You asked what that meant. He didn't explain. He simply said the oracle would know. So now you're winding higher into the white-capped eastern range, where the air thins, and even your thoughts need a moment to catch up. Snow crunches underfoot, but not the gentle, frothy kind. This snow is sharp, crystalline, aggressive. It doesn't fall. It clinks. You crest a ridge and find her there, seated beneath a tree that shouldn't exist this high. Twisted bark, blue needles, covered in frost that doesn't melt. The oracle looks unbothered. A long robe, hands tucked into sleeves, eyes closed like she's dreaming of warmth you'll never know. You dismount and bow awkwardly. "The emperor sent me," you say. She doesn't open her eyes. He always does. Mainstream historical fact. In many pre-modern cultures, mountain hermits weren't seen as outcasts, but as wisdom keepers, poets, astrologers, even climate readers. Some are visited by rulers who believed altitude brought clarity. Others were conveniently ignored until their vague answers could be twisted into prophecy. You hold out a jar. He wants the heaviest snowflake. No idea what that means. She opens one eye. Does he want weight? Or burden? You blink. Sorry. She rises slowly and points to the valley below. See that? That's where the blizzard buried 3 villages last year. Hundreds lost. The snow wasn't heavy in mass, but in memory. She leaves the rest unsaid. You realize this isn't about grams. It's about gravity, emotional weight, history. She walks to a stone shelf carved into the cliff wall. Dozens of jars rest there, unlabeled. Each of these, she says, was caught during loss, death, surrender. They're heavy. You hesitate. But how do I know which one's the heaviest? She shrugs. Depends what you've carried with you. She hands you a jar, its lid etched with a spiral. This one fell as a soldier whispered his last breath. It landed on his lip. Didn't melt. You stare at it. It looks like any other. 6 arms. Fragile. Quiet. But it feels colder. She watches you study it, then says almost gently, "The Emperor wants weight, but not from lifting. From knowing." Joke number 1, it just slips out. "So what you're saying is, he wants trauma in crystal form." She doesn't laugh, but you think her eyebrow twitches. You thank her. She doesn't respond. Just turns and begins sweeping snow off the tree roots with a broom made of frozen reeds. You return to the palace with the jar cradled like a relic. It's not the most symmetrical flake, not the rarest, but it's the one that clings to your fingers a little longer, as if asking not to be sealed away. You present it to the Emperor in silence. He holds it up, examines it, doesn't smile, doesn't nod, just whispers yes. He places it at the center of the high shelf, where only the first, most meaningful flakes are kept. You catch a glimpse of the others, the first snow of his reign, the twin flake he believes mirrors his own fingerprint, the one collected during an eclipse. And now yours. He turns to you. The oracle spoke. She didn't need to, you say. Later, a steward finds you sketching in the archive. He says you're the only one who understood the request. You don't respond. Just write a new label. Captured during silence. Heavy not with mass, but with memory. You realize you've stopped calling them flakes. You call them moments now. Quirky tidbit. Ancient Japanese poets sometimes refer to snow as Furusato no Ko, the voice of the old village. Not because it whispered, but because it returned. Every year, the same, but never the same. You carry the jar back to your quarters for one last look before storage. Hold it to the lantern. The flake reflects the flame, not directly, but in fragments, like it's made of shattered stories. Tiny ones. Historians still argue whether snowflakes contain trace memories of what they fell on. Mountains, fields, ships, graves. Some suggest a flake falling on sorrow is somehow changed by it. You believe it now. That night it snows again. You don't collect. You just sit by the window and watch. For once, that's enough. When the Festival of Frozen Light begins, you barely recognize the city. Every surface glows. Walls draped in silk embroidered with crushed mica, rooftops threaded with chains of pale lanterns, and bridges lined with mirrors angled to catch any flicker of snow. The whole empire seems to hum with quiet awe, as if afraid to breathe too loudly and scare the snow away. But it's not just a celebration. It's an audition. This year, the Emperor has decreed that any citizen may present a crafted snow jar for consideration. If chosen, the jar will be placed in the Central Archive, an honor so prestigious that one woman reportedly sold her husband's spice shop to buy enough chilled silk for her design. She says it was a good trade. Her husband remains unconvinced. You move through the streets in your official robes, flake journal tucked inside your sleeve, watching the festival take shape. Children press their faces to ice lanterns shaped like dragons. Street musicians play slow, crystalline melodies on glass chimes, each note soft as snowfall. Everywhere you go, people whisper, "Have you seen the painter's jar? What about the clockmakers?" You reach the viewing pavilion just before dusk. Hundreds of entries sit in neat rows on chilled stone tables. Some jars are plain, focusing on the perfection of the flake inside. Others are elaborate, silver cages encasing quartz spheres, porcelain jars wrapped in fox fur tassels, even one suspended in a web of frozen silk that must have taken weeks to tie by hand. You recognize one from the Smuggler's Guild. Don't ask how you know. Their jar contains a flake that seems to rotate when tilted. Possibly a trick of layered glass, possibly magic, possibly physics throwing a tantrum. You crouch to inspect a particularly lovely jar labeled Lantern Flake. Inside, a flake shaped like a tiny flame, somehow glowing faintly from within. "That one's mine," says a small voice beside you. A girl, maybe 9, bundled in wool and carrying a wax-stained map. It fell when I blew out a candle. It looked like it was trying to replace the light. You nod slowly. It did a pretty good job. Mainstream historical fact. During the Edo period in Japan, it was common to celebrate the first snow of the season with lantern-lit walks and poetry readings. Many artists believed snow amplified light, not just physically but emotionally. A snowflake could soften grief or brighten nostalgia, depending on the moment it touched. The emperor himself appears after nightfall. No throne, no fanfare, just him, gloved hands behind his back, walking slowly down the aisles. He pauses at the child's jar, lingers, says nothing, then keeps walking. You know how he thinks. A perfect flake in a flawed jar? Rejected. A mediocre flake in a masterpiece container? Also rejected. He wants alignment, symmetry between nature and intention. The selection process takes hours. Court scribes scurry between tables, noting details. Condensation is measured. Jar temperature logged. Provenance questioned. You're asked to assist in final judgment. You agree, reluctantly, because deep down you're curious which ones will pass. Quirky tidbit. One jar contains 2 flakes. Identical, symmetrical, caught moments apart. It's labeled Harmony and Twins, but flagged for inspection. Possible fraud. Possible miracle. You remember the desert smuggler's warning about duplicates and wonder. Is this where the line blurs between flake and forgery? You lift one final jar from a velvet cradle. The flake inside is incomplete. Its arms chipped, its center slightly melted. But the jar is engraved with a poem. It landed on my hand, and for a moment, I remember my mother's voice. You hesitate. It's imperfect, but honest. You set it in the accepted pile. At dawn, only 10 jars are chosen. The girl's lantern flake is one of them. So is yours. The emperor gives no speech. He simply lifts each jar, studies it against the rising sun, and nods once before placing it into the archive. Historians still argue whether the festival was about inclusion or performance. Some say it marked the beginning of imperial softening. Others say it was a test to see what the people valued. Either way, the jars remain on permanent display, labeled with both artist and moment. Later, the girl finds you near the frozen koi pond. I thought he'd hate it, she says. He didn't. Will it melt? Eventually, she frowns. Then why do it? You think for a moment. Then, because some light is worth repeating, even if only for a while. Joke number 1 for the day comes uninvited, and because he taxes it now, might as well enjoy what you're paying for. She laughs. You both do. Back in your quarters, you update your journal. Festival day, snowfall rhythmic, crowd ambient, flakes unusually sociable. Possible influence of lantern heat patterns. You sketch the flame-shaped flake. Add an extra detail. Light wants to be remembered. You look at the growing shelf of accepted jars, and then at the even larger shelf of rejected ones. No less lovely, no less unique. You wonder which shelf says more about the empire. The courtyard smells like scorched wool and boiled iron. That's the scent of war, apparently. You wake to news of a siege, not a full invasion, more like a loud, unpleasant conversation conducted with catapults. The southern rebels have finally arrived, and they're not impressed with the emperors at Snowflake Archive. The palace guard scrambles to reinforce the outer walls. Archers line the towers. Cooks sharpen knives just in case, though no one's quite sure why the cooks, specifically, need to stab anyone. You're summoned to the war room, where the emperor, utterly unfazed, is calmly watching snowflakes land on his sleeve. He brushes one off, then gestures to a map of the city. They've breached the moat. You blink. You mean the frozen moat? He nods. Melted it. You try not to laugh, but joke number 1 escapes. That's one way to drain a metaphor. No one else laughs. Figures. The general, who looks like he eats coal for breakfast, growls. We believe they use ground mirrors and pitch to focus sunlight on the moat ice. It cracked in less than an hour. Mainstream historical note. Ancient siege tactics often involve creative use of light and fire. Archimedes allegedly used mirrors to burn ships. Some Persian armies used polished shields to blind their enemies. Modern historians debate whether any of it worked. or if these were just deeply theatrical strategies invented by bored scribes. The Emperor turns to you. I want peace. You blink again. From me? They want tribute. Give them snow. You stare at him like he's started speaking bird. You want me to deliver snowflakes to a rebel army as tribute? Yes, he says calmly. Tell them it's a token of stillness, of precision, of empire. You don't know whether to applaud or run. Within the hour, you're in a cart with 10 hand-selected jars, bumping down an icy slope toward a field of very confused-looking rebels. Their leader, a woman in cracked armor and a permanent squint, eyes you warily as you dismount. You hold out the first jar. She doesn't move. This is for you, you say. The Emperor offers stillness. There's a long pause. The wind howls. A soldier coughs. Someone in the back drops a ladle. Then she takes the jar, holds it to the light, frowns. What is this? She mutters. It's a snowflake, you reply. Preserved. Perfect. She squints harder. And it does something. You shake your head. It just is. Quirky tidbit. During a lull in the Crimean War, opposing sides once exchanged snowballs instead of gunfire. Not exactly a peace treaty, but for a few frozen hours, it worked. Snow has a way of cooling tempers, or at least confusing them long enough to forget the fighting. She opens the second jar, gasps softly. This one's different. You nod. They all are. She hands one to another officer. They don't melt. Eventually, but not yet. You explain the process, the chilled silk, the wax seals, the classification system. You mention the oracle, the alchemist, the desert flake. They listen, not because they understand, but because they're tired. And the idea that someone, somewhere, is collecting beauty for the sake of it, that's new. Finally, the rebel commander nods. We'll consider the offer. You return to the palace with 9 jars missing and a single, scribbled scroll. Truce, understudy. Await further snow. The Emperor reads it and smiles. Then he surprises you. He lifts one of the remaining jars, seals it again, and says, prepare a set. One for every outpost, every soldier. You stare. You're distributing the archive? Not the archive, he says. The idea of it. Historians still argue whether this moment marked the beginning of snow diplomacy. Some say it was clever distraction. Others believe it was genuine, an attempt to replace swords with symbols. In the weeks that follow, flake caravans travel to every garrison, border, and contested town. Snowflakes become tokens of allegiance, peace, even apology. Soldiers begin comparing flake types like stamps. One writes a song about a 6-pronged flake that landed on his brother's helmet. Another sends one home in a jar labeled, First Snow I Didn't Dread. You start getting requests. From villages, from rival nobles, from the rebels themselves. We heard you have a one shaped like a hawk's eye. Is it true? Some flakes hum? My son was born during last night's storm. Can you find his flake? You do your best. The archive grows, but so does the demand. You begin rationing. Some flakes are never sent. Some stay sealed. Some melt before you can choose. You catch yourself crying over one that evaporated during a delivery delay. You write a new label, lost during diplomacy, perhaps returned to Sky. Back in the throne room, the Emperor calls you Flake Envoy. The court laughs. You don't. You feel the weight. One night, as you're sealing a particularly jagged flake, a wild one, possibly stormborn, you pause. You hold the jar to your chest. Not for warmth, for rhythm. You whisper, you might prevent a war. The flake wobbles, settles. You seal it, label it. Flake presented before second truce. Patter sharp, timing sharper. Then you sleep and dream of flakes falling on sword hilts and melting. You find the astronomer on the roof of the West Tower, halfway through a lecture to no one in particular. His voice carries over the courtyard like a breeze through reeds, soft, sure, slightly condescending. Flake symmetry varies with atmosphere pressure, yes, but what about solar angle? What about heliotropic drift? Don't answer. You'll only embarrass yourself. He adjusts his enormous bronze sundial, which currently casts a long shadow across a row of tiny flake sample trays. Each tray contains a single flake, preserved under glass, soaked thin it would crack if you breathed too hard. You clear your throat. "Ah," he says, "the Emperor's collector. I assume you're here to learn how snowflakes predict the future. You were hoping for a nap? Honestly, but now you nod." He waves you over, nearly knocking over a flask with his sleeve. "Come, I'll show you the sun's fingerprints." He points to a series of charts. Lines crisscross, dots swarm. There are moons, star symbols, several very dramatic arrows. According to him, there is a theory, one he of course invented, that snowflake structure correlates with solar cycles. Certain radial arms only appear during pre-eclipse temperature dips. Others form exclusively when the sun is in Leo. He insists this is scientific, not astrological. You're unconvinced. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient astronomers often believed that weather and the stars were tightly linked. In China, Korea, and the Islamic Golden Age, scholars tracked celestial patterns alongside seasonal shifts. Some even recorded snow as part of eclipse observations, noting unusual storms or clear skies. The astronomer lifts a jar containing a flake with twisted arms, like it tried to become a spiral, but gave up halfway. "This one fell the night before last winter's lunar eclipse," he whispers. "It's not a flake. It's a clock." You raise an eyebrow. He doesn't notice. He's drawing again, muttering about chronocrystalline symmetry and time-folding hexamaps. You glance at the chart. Some of it looks like real math. The rest looks like someone tried to write poetry using a ruler and a bottle of mercury. He catches your look and scoffs. "You don't need to understand. You just need to collect. I'll do the thinking." You smile. Joke number one. "Great, I'll just catch infinite frozen geometry and let you assign it to moon feelings." He frowns. "Not feelings. Vibrations." Of course. You spend the afternoon collecting flakes during specific solar intervals. Every 10 minutes, you log the sun's angle, wind direction, and flake pattern. The flakes are cooperative, thin, pointed, calm. You catch one shaped like a harp, another like a wheel. One actually resembles a tiny flower, and you swear it turns slightly in the light. The astronomer gasps. "Phototropic rotation." You nod. "Bless you." He doesn't laugh, just grabs the jar and holds it against his sundial's bronze rim. Exactly 32 degrees. Solar whispering confirmed. You write a quick note in your journal. Daylight flakes, more symmetrical. Possibly influenced by solar rhythm. Or paranoia. He offers you tea, brewed with something called sun-bled nettles. You decline. He drinks yours. Quirky tidbit. In an old imperial dream book, it was once claimed that snow falling under the shadow of a sundial foretold a shift in dynasty. The snow wasn't dangerous, the book said, but the silence afterward is. You ask the astronomer whether the emperor believes in this solar flake code. He shrugs. He funds it, which, in this court, is belief enough. You return to the archive with 12 new jars, all from high sunlight windows. You mark them Chrono Class series and add timestamps. One in particular draws your attention. It's shaped like an hourglass. No joke. Narrow in the middle, flared at the ends. You hold it up to the flickering torchlight and feel, for just a moment, like you're staring at time, paused mid-breath. Later, the emperor calls you in. He holds the hourglass flake. This one, he says, should fall only once every eclipse season. Yet here it is. He doesn't ask for an explanation, just taps the jar gently, like he's waiting for it to chime. Historians still argue whether the emperor believed in snowflake astrology or merely indulged it to keep his scholars busy. Some suggest he feared flakes shaped like timekeepers. They appeared too often before unexpected deaths. He returns the jar to you and says, "Keep this one close. It may outlast the others." You nod. "Take it." Whisper to it. Then you dream of flakes falling in time with a heartbeat, each landing with a soft tick. You're deep in the forest now, somewhere north of sense and south of good judgment, chasing fireflies and frost at the emperor's request. Technically, he never said why he wanted fireflies involved in snowflake collection. Just sent a scroll with 4 words, "Illuminate the falling ones." So here you are, ankle deep in snow, swatting at glowing insects with a silk net and try not to trip over root clusters shaped like regrets. A page boy accompanied you for the first hour, until a branch creaked overhead and he sprinted back to the palace, mumbling something about ghost snow and unfinished homework. It's dark, too dark, which of course is the point, because that's when the fireflies shine. Dozens of them blink lazily through the trees. Yellow, green, faint blue, like little flying thoughts refusing to land. You hold up your jar, wait, and then, through the stillness, snow begins to fall. You expected chaos, swirling winds, flurries you couldn't track. But no, it's graceful, rhythmic. Each flake drifts through the golden glow of a firefly's halo and takes on an ethereal shimmer. You freeze, jaw slack, because somehow the glow sticks. Flakes drift downward, glowing faintly. Not from within, but from memory, like they've touched light and haven't quite let go. You catch one. It pulses once, then stills. You seal it fast. Mainstream historical fact. In some regions of Siberia and northern Japan, fireflies were once considered messengers between the living and the dead. Snow, meanwhile, was seen as a veil, thin enough for messages to pass through. Combine the two, you get what old scrolls poetically called weather that listens. You begin catching more, timing your jars so each flake passes through a light beam before it settles. The fireflies don't flee. They circle you slowly, curious. One lands on the rim of your jar, pulses twice, and flies off. You're not a mystic, but something about this feels personal. Quirky tidbit. One obscure legend from the high valleys tells of lantern flakes, snow that glows when touched by living flame. The story goes that a prince once caught a glowing flake on his tongue and never had another bad dream. Historians suspect he just stopped sleeping near wolves. Hours pass. You collect a dozen glowing flakes. Not all of them glow forever. Some fade. Others flicker faintly, as if dreaming. You make notes. Flake 77 gamma. Golden hue. Pulsed once. Possibly firefly-aided phosphorescence. Possibly magic. Remain professionally neutral. As you fill your final jar, you notice something odd. One of the fireflies isn't blinking. It glows steadily, hovers, then lands directly on your shoulder. You pause. It doesn't move. You reach up slowly, but before your fingers touch, it bursts into a tiny plume of light and vanishes. And in its place, a single flake drifts down. It glows, faintly, constantly. You hold your breath. Catch it. Seal the jar. Label, persistent radiance. Gifted, not caught. Back at the palace, the guards don't even question your soot-smeared, bug-bitten state. One of them offers you warm wine. You decline. You're vibrating too much for wine. The emperor examines the glowing flakes one by one. Doesn't speak. Just watches the pulsing lights. Then he smiles. Rare. Soft. Dangerous. These will go in the sky chamber, he says. Only the darkest halls deserve the brightest snow. You follow him there. A hidden wing of the archive lit only by lanterns submerged in colored oil. The walls are lined with black stone. The ceiling open to the sky. He places the glowing flakes on a central pedestal, one by one. And as he does, the whole room shifts. Not physically, but perceptually. The jars don't just glow. They echo. You realize, light trapped in frost can remember warmth. And share it. He turns to you. Do you think they'll last? You hesitate. Probably not forever. He nods. Good. Nothing honest should. Historians still argue whether the glowing flakes were real or an elaborate hoax staged by court engineers using phosphorescent fungus and desperate innards. But a few of the jars are still on display today, sealed, glowing faintly. Proof, perhaps, that some lights burn best when cold. That night, you write a new entry in your journal. Glowed like a promise. Faded like a song. Still worth catching. You don't sleep much. You just watch the jar beside your bed pulse quietly until morning. The betrayal isn't discovered all at once. It happens slowly, like a flake melting in reverse. First a suspicion, then a confirmation, then the full, crystalline collapse. You're inspecting a jar labeled Desert Flake. Type Theta, mirror variant when you notice something off. The weight is wrong. It's heavier. Not by much, but enough that your fingers report it before your brain catches up. You unseal the wax, tilt the jar, and watch in horror as something entirely unsnowflake shifts inside. It's sand. A single grain at first, then two. Then a tiny pile slides forward like it's embarrassed to be seen. You freeze. You know what this means. Someone's been swapping snowflakes for desert sand. You double-check the other jars from that shipment. 5 in total. 3 show signs of tampering. Meltwater logs don't match. Labels are slightly off. Written in ink just darker than your own. Someone tried to copy your handwriting. Almost succeeded. You close the lids. Set them aside. And feel your stomach drop. The implications are bigger than you want to admit. These jars have been cataloged, displayed, admired. One of them had even been blessed by a temple monk during the eclipse procession. If these are forgeries, it casts doubt on everything. You report it. The registrar of geometries appears within the hour, dragging his monocle and bad attitude with him. He opens the jar, sniffs the sand. Quartz heavy, northern dune origin. Definitely not from the southern desert. This is contraband. You stare. You know the sand's origin by smell? No, he says, by bitterness. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient forgery detection often relied on the senses, smell, taste, even sound. In Renaissance Europe, coin appraisers would tap metals and listen for irregular chimes. Chinese tea merchants identified fake leaves by how they cracked between the fingers. You begin an investigation. Quietly. The emperor doesn't know yet. You want to be sure. You trace the jars back through delivery logs. One courier name pops up more than once. Morose. A quiet clerk with a fondness for poetry and an unfortunate reputation for always being just out of sight. You find him in the lower archive. Not hiding, just dusting jars. Too calmly. You ask him outright. Why did you do it? He doesn't deny it. Just says, because no one was looking. He opens a side drawer. Inside are dozens of flake sketches. Perfect replicas. He's been drawing duplicates, forging entries, swapping snowflakes for grains of memoryless earth. Some of the sketches are better than yours. They were going to be discarded, he says. Called too ordinary. I saved them, not the flakes. Their idea, the memory. You almost understand. Almost. But it's betrayal. You turn him in. The emperor listens in silence. When you finish, he lifts a jar, one of the forged ones, and studies the sand inside. This is not a flake, he says, but it is still beautiful. He doesn't order punishment, doesn't scream. He simply says, let the archive record it. And so it does. A new shelf is created, untrue flakes, echoes, and errors. The 4 jars are stored there, labeled honestly now. Not as snow, but as deception. You visit it often. Not out of admiration, but reflection. Quirky tidbit. In ancient Islamic calligraphy, it was said that the best forgeries still bore traces of the forger's soul, unintended, but inevitable. You begin to wonder if every fake flake still carries some sliver of longing, of trying to belong. You update your logs with a new color code. Amber ink for contested jars. Morose is reassigned, not dismissed. He's now copying official records, where his skill is welcome and his ethics are easier to contain. But you watch the flake walls more carefully now. Each new capture is triple verified, and yet the damage lingers. You question your earlier jars, the ones you thought perfect. Could they have slipped through too? Been swapped? Been wrong? Historians still argue whether the empire's obsession with uniqueness led directly to its first cracks. If perfectionism breeds deception, if too many rules will always create rebels. One night, you catch a new flake. It's ordinary, hexagonal, no flourish, no twist. You almost throw it away, but instead you seal it, label it, and write, no tricks, no glow, just here. Then place it on your highest shelf, right next to a jar of sand. The wind is feral today, howling through the corridors like a chorus of missed appointments. Snow slams against the palace gates in frantic waves, and everyone walks a little faster, as if they've heard something you haven't. Something's coming. You feel it in your shoulders, in the pit of your stomach. Even the flakes are different now, sharper, more angular. Like the sky is sending down warnings in crystal form. And then comes the summons. The emperor wants you in the courtyard. Full regalia. No delay. You throw on your formal cloak, frost-trimmed, embroidered with tiny six-pointed stars, and step into the storm. There, at the center of the palace square, surrounded by flickering lanterns and 100 kneeling officials, stands the Emperor. He's holding a jar. Your jar. The Dream Flake. He lifts it into the air, and the crowd gasps. Not because of the flake, though it's dazzling, but because of what he says next. Today, I name you keeper of 6 billion flakes. You blink, then blink again. He continues. No snowflake shall enter this archive without your blessing. From this moment on, you are custodian of the sky's memory, the librarian of the frozen breath, the sovereign of silence. You're not sure if this is an honor or a warning, but you bow anyway, deeply, carefully, because the jar is still in his hands, and one wrong move could jostle a miracle. Mainstream historical fact. In the Tang Dynasty, high officials were occasionally granted symbolic titles of control over natural forces. Minister of Rain, Commander of Wind, Keeper of the Northern Mist. These weren't jobs. They were statements. Beliefs made bureaucratic. The Emperor steps forward and hands you the jar. You understood what others missed, he says. That a snowflake is not a decoration. It is a decision. You're sworn in that night under lantern glow to the sound of ceremonial bells dusted with snow. As they chime, new flakes begin to fall, big, slow, theatrical ones. The kind that fall only when the sky wants to be noticed. In the archive, the jars are now arranged differently. Your shelf has expanded. It arches into the center of the chamber now, a crescent of cold logic and gentle madness. The archivist delivers a new scroll, a decree. All flake captures must be witnessed by you or one of your chosen. You now have assistants. 4 of them, all bright-eyed, underslept, and terrified. One bows and asks, "Do you want us to prioritize elegance or rarity?" You reply, "Prioritize honesty. If a flake feels like it's lying, let it go." He writes that down like it's scripture, and maybe it is. Quirky tidbit. One ancient frost sect believed that lying snowflakes could influence dreams. If you fell asleep near a flake that had pretended to be symmetrical, you'd wake up unsure who you were. Naturally, they only slept near meltwater. Your new duties include reading weather reports, attending flake debates, yes, really, and approving materials for next season's jar designs. You sit through a 3-hour discussion about the proper curvature of inner jar lips. You don't say a word, but you do doodle a flake with a little angry face in your notes. You also begin training your team to identify emotional residue. Some flakes seem charged, bitter, delighted, anxious. You teach them to feel for the tremble. One assistant swears a flake flinched when he exhaled too close. You believe him. The Emperor asks for weekly briefings now. Not about war, not about law, about the state of the snow. Do they still fall as strangers? He asks once. You say, sometimes they fall like family. He nods, says nothing more. Historians still argue whether his obsession deepened or clarified at this point. Some say he was grooming a successor. Others say he was preparing to disappear. You begin naming the days by flakes. Not dates. The morning of the backward flake. The hour of 6 twins. The evening of hesitant drift. You're writing a new calendar, whether you admit it or not. One evening, you find a flake so transparent it's nearly invisible. You catch it by accident, chasing another. When you seal it, you realize it reflects only heat. Hold it close, and it shimmers. Hold it away, and it vanishes. You don't show it to the Emperor. You keep it. You label it. Private warmth. Withheld for safekeeping. Your quarters are now a second archive. Unofficial, unlabeled, half poetic. You keep the rejected jars, the misfits, the ones that arrived with no fanfare and no explanation. And yet, those are the jars that hum when the room goes quiet. One night, you dream of the Emperor standing in the snow alone, his robes frozen into stone. He's catching flakes on his bare hands. They land. They melt. He doesn't stop. You wake up whispering, you can't save them all, but maybe you can try. Years have passed. You don't mark them in the old way anymore. Not by calendar or season. You mark them by snowfalls, by patterns, by pauses. There was the year of the spiral blizzards, the month of no flakes, the day the sky forgot how to stop. And today Today is the day of the final jar. You open your eyes before dawn, already knowing. There's a stillness in the air, a hush that only comes before something ends. The sky outside your window hangs low and pale, as if holding its breath. You step out in your robe. No gloves, no hood, no guards this time. Just you. Snow falls soft and slow, like it remembers everything. You walk alone to the archive, past the reflecting pools, now iced over in floral cracks, past the courtyards, where flakes have begun to bury the stone lions, past the shrines, where even the incense smoke drifts like snow, trying to remember how to rise. The final jar is waiting, empty, spotless, handmade with extra care. The clay was fired during a triple eclipse. The wax for the seal came from bees that only fly during snowstorms. The silk inside was harvested from a loom that's now a museum exhibit. You carry it to the balcony above the archive. You know where the last flake will land. You've dreamed of it 100 times. And when it comes, gentle, ordinary, honest, you don't hesitate. You catch it in the center of the jar. It doesn't sparkle. It doesn't glow. It just is. And that's perfect. You seal the lid. Your fingers shake, not from cold, but from release. You descend the stairs. The emperor is there, older, thinner, draped in silence. His crown has long since lost its luster. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. He places one hand on the jar, then nods. Enough, he whispers. You carry the jar to the final shelf, the space left open all these years. And you place it there, centered, aligned, still. The room shifts around you. Or maybe you shift. It doesn't matter. The archive is full. Mainstream historical fact. No empire has ever lasted forever. Not Rome. Not Akkad. Not this one. But some fade gently like embers. Some don't collapse. They crystallize. Quietly. In glass. In clay. In memory. Later that night, you sit alone in your chambers. The fire is low. The wind hums through the flues like a lullaby. You read through the journal one last time. Dream flake. Caught mid-breath. Ghost glow, firefly drift. Spiral echo. Possibly laughing. Quirky tidbit. There is a scroll, hidden somewhere in the archive, that says when the last flake is Jared, the empire will sleep. Not die. Just pause. Waiting to be remembered. You blow out the candle. And somewhere outside, the snow stops falling. Just like that. And now, the storm is over. The snow has settled. The jars are sealed. The fire has curled into its final ember, and even the shadows have stretched as far as they'll go. You sit beside the archive window, watching the hush drift in through the stonework, watching the empire below slowly vanish under its blanket of pale, perfect quiet. It doesn't feel sad. Not exactly. It feels full, like a breath held just a moment longer than usual. Like the exhale will come eventually, but not yet. Not tonight. The shells hold more than flakes now. They hold memory. Questions. Little quiet moments that almost slipped away. A child's laugh. A lantern blink. A soldier's soft song under a frozen sky. They're still here. Still sealed. Still waiting. Even the jars that held nothing special, just ordinary snow, shine in their own way. Because sometimes the most beautiful moments are the ones you don't expect to mean anything until they do. So rest easy now. You've walked through the blizzard, held your breath for hours, stood still as the sky rearranged itself above your head. You've done enough. Let the world drift a little. Let the cold carry the weight. Let the jars keep whispering. They'll remember what you can't. They always do. And somewhere, far beyond the final flake, a new one is already forming, quietly, patiently, ready to fall, ready to be seen. But not just yet. Not tonight. Tonight, we sleep beneath a sky made of memory.